Tonight, Israel is braced for the nightly missile attacks after a day of Israeli attacks across Iran. Despite pleas from world leaders, there is as yet no sign of any de-escalation. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has tonight refused to rule out targeting Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, claiming that his death would help end the conflict, not escalate it. In our first report tonight, here's our international editor, Lindsay Hilson.
What you can hear is the sound of the occupiers attacking our land, says Sahar Emami, the Iranian state TV announcer. After the Israeli strike, people filmed the burning remains of the building. Several journalists and technicians were reported to have been killed. A plume of smoke was visible across Tehran. Earlier, an Israeli military spokesman speaking Persian had warned people to leave the area around the TV station. But people had started streaming out of Tehran overnight, heading for the countryside, anywhere to escape the Israeli bombing. We're disguising the identities of eyewitnesses who are afraid the government will punish them for talking.
People couldn't sleep last night. We were all awake until morning, too anxious to rest. We have been advised to leave Tehran, but the roads are jammed with traffic. Some of my friends tried to get out, but ended up turning back because they couldn't move. We are stuck and desperate. They tell us to stay away from military bases, but we don't even know where they are.
This morning, some started to drive, only to realize they were heading into, not out of danger. Thousands queued for petrol, which has been limited to 25 litres per person.
People were nervous and aggressive. Several fights broke out. The internet connection is terrible. Many of those who had come to the gas station had suitcases, bedding, belongings, and even baby strollers strapped to the roofs of their cars. It's obvious they're leaving.
But where in Iran is safe? Apart from hitting nuclear facilities in Natanz, Fordo and Isfahan, Israel has also struck military and other targets in most of Iran's main cities, including Tabriz, Tehran, Mashhad, Kermanshah, Arak, Ahwaz, Abadan and Shiraz. Today, the Israelis struck Waterfall Park in the northwest of the capital. The Iranian government has appealed to Oman, Qatar and Saudi Arabia to press Israel for a ceasefire. They blame the US for Israel's decision to attack.
We were engaged in negotiations. In the middle of a diplomatic process, we were confronted with an act of aggression by the Zionist regime. As I have previously stated, we cannot imagine that such an action by the Zionist regime could have taken place without coordination, cooperation and support from the United States.
President Trump, with the Canadian Prime Minister at the G7, didn't sound inclined to enter the conflict on Israel's side, but was nonetheless putting the onus on Iran.
They have to make a deal, and it's painful for both parties, but I'd say Iran is not winning this war, and they should talk, and they should talk immediately before it's too late.
Israel today released drone footage, apparently of an attack on Iranian troops launching a missile. Even if Iran agreed to President Trump's demands, Israel might continue to attack, hoping to topple the regime. Tonight, Iranian state TV is broadcasting old videos of patriotic songs over beautiful rural scenes. The Iranian government no longer has a reliable means of communicating with its people, and may not be clear what exactly it has to say.
Lindsay Hilson reporting there. Well, so far 24 people have been killed in Israel and more than 500 injured, while there was substantial damage in the heart of Tel Aviv and the central city of Petah Tikva as some missiles slipped through Israel's air defense systems. Israelis have been told to stay close to shelters tonight in anticipation of another Iranian ballistic missile attack. Our correspondent, Paul McNamara, now reports.
the new soundtrack of Tel Aviv nightlife. Night 3 of Iranian retaliation. Night 3 of protective Iron Dome interceptor rockets. Night 3 of some missiles making it through. There were multiple attacks across Israel during the night, the last round just before dawn.
It's just come up to 5 a.m. The strike happened about half an hour ago. Behind us, there were still fire crews trying to put something out in a building to the side. The front of it has completely come down. Search and rescue crews are in there at the moment. But unlike other strikes that we've been at over the last couple of days, this is the heart of Tel Aviv. We are surrounded by buildings and huge amounts of people.
Emergency workers drowned the flash fires of an explosive impact, and searchlights surveyed the contorted concrete and twisted steel that used to be homes. The city streets of this upmarket neighbourhood littered with the burned out husks of war.
We were in the basement and then we felt the shock. And then the basement, this massive steel door that's usually it stays shut, it just completely flew open. And then we got really scared because we could feel the impact and we knew, and it's just like, when you're under that, it's basically Russian roulette, like you don't know which house is next.
When you came out of the shelter?
Yeah, I ran to the apartment to see what happened, with my house, and I saw that there is no house.
At least 8 people were killed at 5 locations across Israel overnight. The total now in the last 3 nights, 24 dead and nearly 500 injured. The planned impact isn't only human though, but commercial too. The scene just next to an oil refinery in Haifa last night. Plumes of smoke billowing into the skies, a response to strikes Israel launched on Iranian oil depots this weekend. No matter the target, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told his fighter pilots today they can fly near enough unchallenged.
The Israeli Air Force controls the skies of Tehran. This is a change in the entire campaign. We are on our way to achieving our 2 goals, eliminating the nuclear threat and eliminating the missile threat. When we control the skies of Tehran, we are hitting these targets, the targets of the regime.
World leaders have urged him to de-escalate, but this is a man who listens little to the urges of others. The attack on Iran and the waves of retaliatory strikes has created rare political consensus, with many opposition figures lending their backing to a prime minister they wanted gone only last week. On his city's streets, though, there is fear. Although the death toll in Israel is far lower than that inflicted on Iran and the thousands in Gaza, many Israelis are coming to terms with their newfound vulnerability.
A week ago, 2 weeks ago, and you hear those air raid sirens, would you have always gone into the shelter?
So the stuff that's happening now, yeah, but the stuff that was coming from Gaza, no. But this stuff is just, I mean, you can see the damage. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
The damage caused by the missiles is a game changer. You see it, and everyone go into the shelter.
The question now facing Israelis. The Prime Minister may believe this is the price worth paying to open up a new front in this regional conflict, but do they?
Paul McNamara reporting. Well, earlier I spoke to the President of Israel, Idan Hatsok, a former chair of Israel's Labour Party who's held several ministerial roles. I began by asking him whether Israel now feels more vulnerable.
I understand that Israelis are in full coherence with the fact that they know that we are removing an existential threat, a threat that was about to break forward an Iranian nuclear program, an Iranian bomb in front of our eyes. But so it's clear that we had to do it, right, and Israelis are in total calm with it.
But was it really necessary? Because there were going to be more talks this Sunday, which have now been called off. You know, there are many people, including the Trump administration, who believe that the Iranians were on a diplomatic track here.
Except
so
that
was this war really necessary? And if it wasn't, is this a dangerous gamble?
Except that they're shying away from very clear facts. We knew that the Iranians are moving to the bomb. We showed it to the administration. And by the way, it's a threat not only to Israel. It's a clear and imminent threat to the region and clear and imminent threat to Europe.
But we know that Prime Minister Netanyahu has opposed any kind of diplomatic engagement with Iran when it comes to nuclear enrichment or nuclear programs from the very beginning. We also know that when there was a deal done between the US and Iran, the enrichment went right down. And it only then accelerated after Trump scrapped the deal.
Except that in recent years we've seen a constant change and progress and advancement of the Iranian nuclear program, billions of dollars poured into it, and engineers and scientists working endlessly towards it. And they've developed a huge missile program. And don't forget October 7th, because that's a key change, meaning all of a sudden that empire of proxies and evil all over the region has started closing in on Israel, and we know that they have plans constantly to eradicate Israel.
Are you using this, are you seizing this opportunity because you have depleted Iran's allies? Does your government see this as an opportunity to do the one thing you've always wanted to do, which is regime change in Iran?
So I will say, first of all, that we don't think that all these proxies are gone away. On the contrary, they're still full with armaments and planning to attack us all the time. And secondly, you know, we didn't declare that this is one of the objectives of our operation. However, we do say to the Iranian people, it's your chance if you want to. You're under one of the most oppressive regimes.
You might actually rally the Iranian people, even those who hate the Ayatollahs, behind the government.
That's why I say clearly, it's not one of the objectives, but we know for sure that there is a huge storm within the Iranian people, and they do not agree with their government, and they want change.
Is Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, a legitimate target for Israel?
Ayatollah Khamenei is the leader of a country that advocates terror, havoc, and eradicating my nation.
Does that make him a legitimate target?
Wait a minute. So anybody who advocates and operates terror against us is always a target, but I want to make clear it's not one of the objectives of our operation right now, and therefore I don't really want to give you a full answer.
Are the citizens, the civilian citizens of cities like Tehran, are they legitimate?
No, not at all. And we say it clearly. We obey strictly the rules of international humanitarian law, and we made it clear. The Iranian civilians are not the target, and they're not our enemies.
Are you going to do in parts of Iran, maybe in Tehran, what you did in Gaza?
I don't think so. It's not our aim. We want to make sure that where are all the elements that form the nuclear program of Iran, that's where we will deal.
But isn't the danger with this that, you know, you can bomb the facilities, you can kill the scientists, but you can't bomb the knowledge, and that once they've recovered from this very bruising experience, there's going to be a sprint towards a nuclear weapon?
But for that, you need the partnership with the free world, who is convening today in Canada for the G7 summit. For years, they've been condemning Iran. For years, they've been saying, hey, we must stop the Iranian nuclear program. For years, they've taken steps and passed on resolutions. Well, now is the moment.
One of the reasons why they might not be supporting you, these governments, is because a lot of the publics in the West, they've turned against Israel because of what you've done in Gaza.
I am very much aware of what people see in their criticism of Israel, but they also have to understand...
Do you accept that criticism, by the way?
We understand the criticism, but we don't agree with it. Meaning, when you see day in, day out only certain narrative, which doesn't reflect the fact that, let's take, for example, a hospital in Khan Yunis. We don't bomb the hospital in Khan Yunis. We go underneath and we find the command and control center of
the whole
Hamas.
hospital collapses on top of it.
No, the command and we never brought down a whole hospital. It's not true.
Are you hoping that the Americans will get involved? Are you trying to draw them into the conflict?
We are not playing these games. We have an open and frank dialogue with the United States of America. And we trust our alliance with the Americans.
President Herzog, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Well, in a parallel universe, the G7 leaders are gathering for their summit in the Canadian Rockies, overshadowed by the Iran-Israel conflict. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is there. Gary.
Everything here hangs on one man's words. And Donald Trump wants to break an international status quo his fellow leaders here want to preserve. Canada's Prime Minister trying to minimise disagreements at a time when yet another conflict has exploded on the scene.
This marks the 50th birthday of the G7, and the G7 is nothing without U.S. leadership.
The struggle for this summit in the Rockies is to prove these gatherings can be useful when the leader of the United States wants to take the world in a different direction. Donald Trump used his very first words at this summit to lament that President Putin wasn't there. Russia was thrown out of these meetings for annexing Crimea.
They don't talk. Putin speaks to me. He doesn't speak to anybody else. He doesn't want to talk because he was very insulted when he got thrown out of the G8. As I would be, as you would be, as anybody would be. He was very insulted. And, I mean, he was thrown out.
President Zelensky will join leaders in Alberta, but will be acutely aware that the Iran-Israel conflict has shot above his country's fate in these leaders' thoughts. Number 10 issued its own footage of Keir Starmer's journey here. The Prime Minister's relentlessly focused on one word on the Middle East crisis: de-escalation, with few clues how that might be achieved.
I do think there's a consensus for de-escalation. Obviously, what we need to do today is to bring that together and to be clear about how it is to be brought about. But the risk of the conflict escalating is obvious, I think, and the implications, not just for the region but globally, are really immense.
The formal summit welcomes have been happening in the last hour. These gatherings survived Donald Trump's first term in the White House just. He left the last Canada-hosted G7 in 2018 early and attacked the then Canadian Prime Minister on his way out.
I have a good relationship with Justin Trudeau. I really did. Other than he had a news conference that he had because he assumed I was in an airplane and I wasn't watching. He learned that's going to cost a lot of money for the people of Canada.
This time round, his Canadian hosts are determined not to provoke the US president. They're not even promising an agreed communique in case the drafting process makes President Trump feel ganged up on.
We might not agree on absolutely every issue, but where we will cooperate, we will make an enormous difference.
President Macron made a point of stopping off in Greenland on his way here to register his opposition to President Trump's threat to annex the country. The US president's begun trade conflicts with nearly all the leaders around this table. They're all hoping to ease that pain while they're in the Rockies. Massive distractions and divisions as the world faces a Middle East conflict with the potential for momentous, grim fallout. Well, President Trump doesn't really get this organisation. He doesn't really get many multilateral organisations. But the very fact that he said President Putin should be here tells you he doesn't really understand the G7 was meant to be an organisation for the richest countries in the world that supported the international rules-based system, the post-war system. It was briefly thought President Putin might be on that trajectory, but when he clearly wasn't, he was thrown out. But to double down on that, Donald Trump even raised the prospect that maybe China's president should be invited here. Nearly all the leaders here are focused on basically trying to maneuver Donald Trump while he's here and extract stuff from him, whilst at the same time not provoking him and making it obvious to him what they're about. The talks have only just got underway in the last hour. They've got a lot of delicate work ahead of them. On trade, there could be one little glimmer of light, though, for Britain, if not for others. Keir Starmer increasingly sounding like he really thinks that he could have got that sort of mini discreet trade deal for the UK out of the US.
Gary in Canada, thanks very much indeed. Now, as the focus has turned to the war between Israel and Iran, the war in Gaza is becoming ever more deadly and devastating. In what's become a macabre daily routine, more desperately hungry people were gunned down today as they tried to collect food aid from the new US and Israeli-backed distribution centre. Our foreign affairs correspondent Secunder Kermani has the latest.
What to fear more, bullets or hunger? Under fire yet again, crowds of desperate Palestinians waiting in the hope of collecting food from the new Israeli-backed aid scheme. 20 people were killed here in southern Gaza by Israeli soldiers today, according to local officials. Others managed to grab something to take home to their families. As conflict and bloodshed reverberate throughout the region, Gaza remains by far the deadliest place. Victims and the injured taken to the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis. We went there thinking we would get aid to feed our children, says this man. but it turned out to be a trap. Hundreds of people are now said to have been gunned down in repeated incidents around the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation sites in the few weeks they've been operating.
That all became a red zone.
We spoke to a British doctor in Gaza who says he's treated half a dozen victims, all apparently shot whilst lying down.
So if you've got an injury to, let's say, your left shoulder area and then going through your scalp, so that the trajectory of that has to be, so it's either you're standing up and the bullet's coming from absolutely straight down, which, vertically down, that's not realistic, or you would have to been lying down on the ground, probably with your hands out, face down, and so it glances your shoulder and then the back of your head. So if you see that's an example of the same pattern in patients, you're like, well, that's not accidental.
And tell me about some of the other cases you've been dealing with.
He's a 15-year-old boy who's in ITU. Shrapnel's gone through his spinal cord, so he's paraplegic, so nothing below his waist. And he sort of says, "Can I die, please?" And part of that is because he's got no family, so his family's all dead as well now. And you're thinking, oh, how's he going to manage in a wheelchair around Gaza in the rubble, by himself?
The missile strikes being exchanged by Israel and Iran mean the focus is no longer on Gaza, but the suffering here is as awful as it's ever been.
Secunder Kermani reporting there. We'll be back in a few minutes from Tel Aviv, but let's go to Krish in London. Krish.
Thanks, Matt. Well, the clash between Israel and Iran has put the world's oil markets on edge. Prices have slipped back today after surging on Friday. Financial markets are watching to see if conflict interrupts the flow of oil and gas from the region, which so much of the world depends on. Our economics correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, is with me. So what are the risks to the global economy?
Well, if it can't control even its own skies, the Iranian regime could become increasingly desperate. And Krish, its ultimate bargaining chip is the threat of blocking the Strait of Hormuz. That's this tiny little 24-mile wide choke point south of Iran that leads to the Arabian Sea. Now, that would create economic havoc the world over, but analysts suggest that could only be a last-ditch attempt because it would undoubtedly embroil the US directly into the conflict.
And why does the Strait of Hormuz matter so much?
Well, let's take a look at this map from live pictures of the Strait of Hormuz. All of the green dots that you can see are oil and gas tankers that have to pass through the strait, ferrying cargo from all across the Middle East, not just Iran. And Lloyd's List says that while traffic has slowed, as you can see from all of that, it's still pretty busy. And Krish, every month, the Strait of Hormuz carries more than a quarter of the world's entire globally traded oil supplies and around 20% of its liquefied natural gas. Latest figures also show where that oil is going. 84% is being sent east to China, South Korea, and Japan. And while all of those green dots, those ships haven't been attacked yet, there are increasing complaints of jamming, severe jamming, and also spoofing. That's when fake images are projected, which heightens the risk of maritime travel.
Right, so what does all this mean for international markets and domestic prices?
Well, you've got oil, which has fallen back to $70 today. But on Friday, Krish, it had its biggest intraday price spike since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So you can see how critical it is. And for every $10 increase in oil, you get around 5% increase at the petrol pumps here in the UK. But it's not just oil. The UK is heavily dependent on Qatari gas, which is dependent on the Strait of Hormuz. So any kind of blockade would have an impact on bills here. But don't forget, President Trump promised his voters that he would get petrol prices in the US down to $45 a barrel. It's one of his key promises. So despite all of the chaos of recent months in tariffs, actually energy prices had been falling, which has kept inflation at bay. If the crisis continues, those kind of promises will be put under strain.
Thanks, Helia. Let's go back to Matt.
Thanks, Krish. Well, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Ali Vaz, Director of the Iran Project at the International Crisis Group. Ali Vaz, thanks very much for coming on the programme. I mean, there's so much discussion about what would happen if the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, was killed by the Israelis or disappeared or just died because he's, after all, a pretty old man. What difference would it make to the regime in Tehran?
Look, the supreme leader is certainly at the pinnacle of power in Iran and plays a very important role. There's no doubt about it. But I think there is a little bit of mixing up of what Israel has been able to achieve in quashing non-state actors like Hezbollah and Hamas, where you eliminate the main leader, and it really has a paralyzing effect over the entirety of the system. And a state like Iran, which has 3,000 years of government history. There are institutions in Iran that are deeply entrenched. The ranks within the military and the political elite are pretty deep, and they can always replace individuals. Now, of course, I'm not going to contend that it is not going to have an effect, but it might not necessarily have the intended effect. The most important thing to consider is that there is no viable, organized, disciplined opposition to the Islamic Republic available to step in and take over power in case of regime implosion.
Yeah. By the way, that sound you can hear is the call to prayer from the mosques in this part of Tel Aviv, which is called Jaffa, which is, there are quite a few Palestinians living here, quite a few Muslims living here. Not the sound of sirens that many people had feared would be happening right now. But back to the subject of Iran, Ali. I mean, again, the Israelis have this sort of thought, wishful thinking, if you like, that if the attacks continue, the regime would crumble and there'd be some kind of revolution. They virtually called for it the other day. But do you think that the Iranian people, even if they dislike the Ayatollahs, will rally behind them?
It's really magical thinking. Look, it's true that the Islamic Republic is very unpopular, if not hated, by the majority of the Iranian people. But the Iranians are also very nationalistic. And Prime Minister Netanyahu, given his own track record of what he has done to undermine democracy in Israel, and the amount of bloodshed that the Iranians have witnessed in the past a year and a half, basically, I doubt that they see him as a credible face for advocating for democracy in Iran or for liberating the Iranians. As I said, I think the likeliest scenario in case of any kind of regime destabilization is that is more of Saddam in 1991, not Saddam in 2003, meaning that the regime might survive, even if it would be weaker and it would not be able to have full territorial control. Or you might have Iran descend into civil strife. That's also a likely scenario.
Ali Reyes in Washington, thank you very much indeed. Well, our foreign affairs correspondent Secunder Kermani is with me here on the terrace. Secunder, we're hearing the call to prayer, which is sort of quite reassuring because we were expecting another sound, the sound of sirens after that blood-curdling warning from Tehran. But you look at these streets and you know this city well. This is extraordinary, isn't it? Eerily quiet.
Absolutely, Matt. I think the last time I must have seen the streets of Tel Aviv this quiet was just after October the 7th. But of course, right now, the situation is very different. Israel really feels it's on the front foot. I mean, let's take a step back and reflect about where we are right now. Israel, it seems, has the ability to hit Iran whenever, wherever it wants. That's something that was pretty much unthinkable up until recently. And yes, Iran is able to launch ballistic missiles. Yes, some of those are not intercepted and cause casualties, but it certainly seems that that is a price, for now at least, Israel is willing to pay, certainly in exchange for the crushing, devastating blows it's dealing to Iran and its military right now.
And yet we know from the past that, the famed, the mythical Iron Dome was able to stop virtually every missile coming from Hamas or even from the Houthis. That's not the case with these Iranian missiles, is it?
That's absolutely the case. And we've seen a number of them land and cause civilian casualties. And you speak to Israelis here and they feel that the threat is different. But at the same time, most of the Israelis that I've been speaking to, and polls suggest that, unlike the situation in Gaza, which even within Israel now is very divisive, in the Israeli public, the Jewish Israeli public certainly firmly back this attack against Iran, for now at least.
Secunder, thanks very much. Now, it is very difficult to tell the story of exactly what is happening inside Iran, while power and internet outages are making it even harder for any civilians there to get their voices out. As we've heard, the capital Tehran is a focus of the Israeli strikes, and many there are deciding whether to evacuate or to stay and just hope for the best. Here are the two stories of two Iranians facing that dilemma in their own words. One, a 13-year-old girl whose family has fled. The other, a young woman who struggled to make up her mind. And we've disguised their voices to protect their identities.
In the first week of the war, there was a lot of fear. We constantly heard the sound of bombs, explosion, and the anti-aircraft fire. As a 14-year-old who has never experienced war before, I was personally really scared. And we were all anxious and didn't know what was going to happen next. The sound was terrifying, so loud that the windows of our house were shaking.
I'm in touch with at least 10 to 15 friends and relatives. Many of them have remained in Tehran, and I personally prefer to stay at home because I feel it's safer here. Part of that is because, honestly, I might trust the ones doing the attacking more than I trust my own government.
On the second or the third night, we decided to leave the capital, Tehran. The roads were extremely crowded, and if we had left just a little bit later, we wouldn't have been able to get out of the city.
People around me have also tried to leave the city, but after being stuck in standstill traffic for hours, many of them ended up turning back and coming home. The thought of running out of fuel in the middle of the road, in the mountains or the desert, or your car breaking down and getting stranded feels scarier than staying in your own home.
Sadly, Tehran was under heavy attack, and those intense sounds were truly traumatizing. The fear and anxiety they caused were overwhelming, especially when you're worried about your loved ones. It's heartbreaking to even imagine losing someone so close to you. Tehran is the city that I grew up in. It's a part of my homeland and I love everything about it. The thought that it's being destroyed, it's something that really pains me.